It was in the cool highlands of Sri Lanka that Dr. Eleanor Hart, a Western neuroscientist and mindfulness researcher, met Bani Javako, a forest monk who had spent over 3 decades in the silence of ancient meditation caves. She had come seeking wisdom, hoping to trace the origins of mindfulness beyond the modern scientific studies, apps, and workshops. Bani Javako greeted her with simplicity. No robes of grandeur, no chants or rituals, just a smile that carried the weight of silence. "You were looking for Sati?" he asked after a long pause. "Yes," she said, "but I want to know what it really meant before it became this thing we sell in workshops. Before it became therapy." The monk nodded slowly. "Then you must unlearn first. The Sati you know is not the Sati the Buddha taught. Modern definitions of mindfulness often reduce it to a brief slogan, being present, non-judgmentally, in the moment." But Bani Javako explained to Eleanor that in the Pāli Canon, the oldest surviving record of the Buddhist teachings, the word Sati comes from the root square root sm, which means to remember. This remembering was not merely about attention, but about recalling the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings, in every experience. Sati was part of the Noble Eightfold Path, listed as Samasati, right mindfulness. It wasn't neutral or secular. It had a purpose, to aid in the ending of suffering. "It's not just knowing your breath," the monk said. "Doesn't mindfulness help people reduce anxiety, increase focus?" "Certainly," he said, "like cleaning the surface of a mirror. But will that reveal the face behind the mirror?" He then quoted from the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse most commonly cited to support modern mindfulness practices. "Athai kotiva panasa sati pakafit hoti." Mindfulness is established with the thought. There is a body. The Pali word pakupahita means firmly established, not simply noticed. Sati is not a fleeting moment of awareness, but a steady recollection that helps uproot ignorance. He explained that Sati has 2 main characteristics. Memory of the Dhamma, to remember what leads to suffering and what leads to liberation. Guarding the mind, like a gatekeeper who does not allow unwholesome states to enter. In modern practices, mindfulness often lacks this moral dimension, this discernment that was always paired with Sati in the suttas. Eleanor admitted that modern mindfulness came from good intentions to reduce stress, to bring peace, but it had been secularized, stripped of its ethical and transcendental aims. She told Bani about John Kabat-Zinn, who in the 1970s developed the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Though it helped millions, it consciously removed Buddhist language, framing mindfulness as a clinical tool. Bani nodded. "A tool without its compass. A knife can heal or harm, but Sati was never meant to be neutral. It is a sword of wisdom." He recited again. "Sati is for the purpose of insight, not for relaxation." The true aim of Sati was to see the 3 marks of existence in all experiences. Anicca, impermanence. Dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. Anatta, non-self, to stop at calmness. Without seeing these truths was to stop midway across the river. Bani asked Eleanor, "Do you know what comes with Sati?" She shook her head. "Sampajana," he said firmly. "Clear comprehension." In the Pali texts, these 2 are inseparable. Wherever Sati is found, Sampajana walks beside it. It means more than being aware. It means understanding why the experience arises. Whether it is skillful or unskillful, whether it leads to bondage or freedom. In modern mindfulness, people often say, just observe, don't judge. But Bani explained that in early Buddhism, the practitioner was trained to discern, to abandon the unwholesome and cultivate the wholesome. "This is not judgment and ego," he said, "but wisdom in action." Eleanor turned to the Satipatthana Sutta again. "People teach mindfulness of the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects," she said. "Isn't that what's happening in modern practices?" "Yes and no," Bani replied. "They teach observation, but not penetration." He explained the 4 foundations as Kayanupassana, contemplation of the body. Not to relax, but to see its impermanence. Vedananyupassana, contemplation of feeling, not to enjoy, but to understand reactivity. Siddhanupassana, contemplation of mind, to see it is not mind. Dhammanupassana, contemplation of mental phenomena, especially hindrances and the 4 noble truths. Each of these was to be explored through Dhamma lens, not just awareness. Without this frame, mindfulness becomes self-referential, another activity of the ego. One evening, Eleanor reflected, what if we're offering people a medicine without the diagnosis? Bani smiled gently. Worse, it may mask the symptoms while the disease spreads. He told her about Sati, wrong mindfulness, a term rarely mentioned in popular teachings. Not all mindfulness is wholesome. One can be mindfully angry, mindfully manipulative. Right mindfulness, he said, is mindfulness aligned with the path, rooted in ethics and wisdom. This is why the Buddha emphasized sila before sati. Without restraint of speech and action, mindfulness may become a tool for sharper craving. As the days passed, Eleanor began to see how modern mindfulness had become a lifestyle brand, sold as productivity hacks, corporate training, or even sensual enhancement. But in the suttas, sati was always tied to liberation. It was the tool used by arahants to free themselves from rebirth. Eleanor asked, "Can we ever bring that depth into the modern world?" Banny looked to the forest. "Only if we stop selling comfort and start teaching truth." Before leaving, Eleanor made a vow not to reject modern mindfulness, but to reroot it. She would begin teaching with a new emphasis, not just awareness, but awareness for the sake of wisdom. She would speak of impermanence, craving, and liberation, not just stress and focus. In her final conversation, Banty said, "The Buddha did not teach mindfulness to make people calm. He taught mindfulness so they could see clearly enough to let go." When Eleanor returned to her university, she began a new course titled Mindfulness as Remembering. Sati in the Pāli tradition. She opened her first lecture with a quote not from a neuroscientist, but from the Buddha. Sati guards the world. When sati is lost, all is lost. When sati is established, the Dhamma shines. And in that light, a new wave of students began their own path, not just to mental clarity, but to freedom. Back in her guest house, Eleanor printed out the full Satipatthana Sutta in English and Pali. She had read it before in parts, during her MBSR training. But now, under the Sri Lankan sky and Bani Javako's influence, the text read like a different scripture. Each section was rich with impermanence and death contemplation, not just present moment awareness. The refrain kept repeating after each object of mindfulness. In this way, he abides contemplating the body, feelings, mind, dhammas internally, externally, both, with clear knowledge. With mindfulness, for the purpose of understanding and abandoning craving. This was not neutral. This was surgical insight into how clinging creates suffering. Why don't the modern courses teach this part? She whispered aloud. The answer, she realized, was unsettling, because it makes people uncomfortable. But liberation, she now understood, was not comfortable. It was transformative. Bandy gave her a copy of the Visuddhimagga, the great 5th century Theravada commentary by Buddhaghosa. Here, sati was explained with even more precision. As a mental factor that does not float away. As that which remembers the object without drifting. And most crucially, that which prevents forgetfulness of the true nature of things. Sati was not passive. It acted as the mental glue that held attention on the truth, while discernment analyzed it. Without sati, wisdom couldn't function. Modern mindfulness often severed this connection. It saw sati as sufficient on its own, when in the Buddhist model, sati was only one factor among many in a system designed for awakening. Banti recited a famous simile from the Majjhima Nikaya. Just as a gatekeeper at a city gate is wise, skilled, and intelligent, he keeps out strangers and lets in friends. So too, a meditator with established sati guards the mind. Sati was not a bystander. It was a protector, one that filtered experience. Another analogy from the commentaries described sati as a mirror, but one that reflects not just surface reality, but underlying tendencies. It revealed clinging, aversion, and delusion. Modern mindfulness often taught people to look at the mirror, but not to see through it. Eleanor began to realize why so many meditators stalled in their practice. They were looking at their experience, but not looking into its nature. Curious how the Buddha himself used mindfulness before his enlightenment. Eleanor asked Banti about the early life of Siddhartha Gautama. Banti pointed her to the Aryapariyasana Sutta. The Bodhisattva practiced jhanas with 2 teachers and mastered them, but he saw they did not lead to full liberation. Instead, he turned inward, recalling a childhood moment when he spontaneously entered jhana under a rose apple tree. He remembered this state of calm clarity, not just as peace, but as a foundation for insight. Could this be the path to awakening? He asked himself. Here, sati was not just bare attention. It was a remembering of a skillful state, a thread of insight through lifetimes. Sati, in the Bodhisattva's life, was the link between past wisdom and present clarity. Eleanor asked Bandy. But isn't it okay to teach mindfulness without morality, just to help people cope? He gently replied, Sati without sila is like a torch with no oil. It flickers but cannot illuminate. In early Buddhism, the Eightfold Path is indivisible. Sati follows right speech, action, and livelihood. These are not rules, they are cleansing mechanisms. A mind filled with guilt, lies, and harm cannot establish steady mindfulness. The mind must be ethical to be subtle. Modern programs that taught mindfulness without ethics were training people to become better observers, but not necessarily better people. Banty told Eleanor about his friend, Ajahn Covey, a Thai forest monk who practiced Yagavakara, a little-known meditative lineage in Southeast Asia. In this tradition, Sati was cultivated through repetitive chants, body scanning, and vivid visualizations, but always rooted in moral purity and death contemplation. The emphasis was on knowing clearly, not just noticing. Ajahn Covey once said, "If you are aware of the breath but not of the one who clings to it, you are still caught." This matched the Buddha's own style, dissecting every moment to find the seed of craving. Eleanor had once published a study showing that 8 weeks of mindfulness increased gray matter in the hippocampus. But Banny challenged her, and what about the heart? He wasn't dismissing science, but warning that brain scans couldn't measure wisdom. They couldn't detect the cessation of craving or the softening of the ego. In the Vinaya, the monastic code, mindfulness was not about performance or efficiency. It was about restraint, dignity, and presence infused with purpose. Modern research could validate effects, but it risked missing the essence. Banny told her of a dying monk who, as he exhaled his final breath, whispered, Rapa Anika, Vedana Anika, Sakara Anika. Form is impermanent. Feeling is impermanent. Formations are impermanent. His sati remained intact even as his body dissolved. That was the fruit of a lifetime of training sati as remembrance of truth in the face of death. Modern mindfulness rarely prepares people for death. It soothes, but does not liberate. But true sati is a torch one carries through the darkest tunnel, and if held firmly, it shows there was never truly a tunnel at all. Back home, Eleanor began a new movement. She didn't reject mindfulness, but she renamed her course. Clear Knowing, Sati, and the Wisdom Path. She included study of early suttas, ethical reflections, compassionate discernment, meditation aimed at letting go, not just relaxation. She wrote, "Let us stop using mindfulness to sharpen our distractions. Let us return to the Dhamma, where awareness walks hand in hand with freedom." In her final lecture of the semester, Eleanor spoke softly. Mindfulness today is like a lotus growing outside the pond. Beautiful, but detached from its root. She paused. But sati, as the Buddha taught it, is different. It is remembering what matters, the truth of impermanence, the futility of clinging, the nobility of letting go. She ended with these words from the Masatipana Sutta. This, monks, is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of dukkha and discontent, for the attainment of the right path, and for the realization of nibbana, namely, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Silence followed. Then, one student whispered, "This isn't just mindfulness. This is awakening." And the lotus touched the pond once more.